Sarah Martinez adjusted her camera strap for the 100th time that morning as she crouched behind a crumbling concrete barrier. The acrid smell of smoke and dust filled her nostrils, mixing with the metallic taste of fear that had become her constant companion over the past 3 weeks. As a veteran war correspondent for Global News Network, she had covered conflicts in 12 different countries, but the intensity of this particular battleground in Eastern Europe still made her hands tremble slightly when she reached for her equipment. The war had been raging for 8 months, and Sarah had arrived to document the human cost of the conflict. Her editor back in New York had been clear about the assignment: get the stories that others couldn't, show the world what was really happening beyond the sanitized reports coming from official sources. Sarah had built her reputation on exactly this kind of work, going where others feared to tread, and bringing back images and stories that changed public perception. Her current position overlooked a strategic crossroads that both armies considered vital. For the past week, control of this intersection had changed hands 3 times, leaving the surrounding buildings scarred with bullet holes and shrapnel damage. Local civilians had long since evacuated, leaving behind empty homes that now served as cover for soldiers from both sides. Sarah had been documenting the daily rhythm of warfare when she noticed something unusual. Every morning, just as the sun rose above the eastern hills, a series of precise shots would ring out from somewhere in the urban maze below. These weren't the chaotic bursts of automatic weapons fire that characterized most of the fighting. Instead, there were single, carefully placed shots that seemed to come from different locations each time. The phenomenon had caught her attention 3 days ago, when she witnessed the enemy patrols suddenly lose their point man to what appeared to be an impossible shot. The bullet had come from at least 800 meters away, threading between 2 buildings and finding its target with surgical precision. Sarah had tried to photograph the aftermath, but her position was too far away to capture the details her editors would need. Yesterday, she had repositioned herself closer to the action, setting up in an abandoned apartment building that offered better vantage points. The building's previous occupants had left behind family photographs and children's toys, stark reminders of the normal life that had existed here before the conflict arrived. Sarah had carefully moved these personal items to safety before setting up her equipment, a small gesture of respect that had become her ritual in these situations. From her new position, she had managed to capture several photographs of the mysterious marksman's handiwork. Each shot demonstrated an almost supernatural level of skill and timing. The shooter seemed to know exactly when and where targets would appear, leading Sarah to wonder if she was witnessing the work of a legendary sniper whose reputation had been growing throughout the conflict. Local soldiers had begun referring to this phantom shooter as the Ghost because of their ability to appear and disappear without detection. Some claimed to have caught glimpses of a figure moving through the ruins, but these sightings were always brief and contradictory. Sarah had interviewed several soldiers from both sides, and their descriptions varied wildly. Some described a tall man with a beard. Others spoke of a smaller figure in civilian clothes, and a few insisted they had seen a woman's silhouette against a distant window. What remained consistent across all accounts was the shooter's extraordinary effectiveness and their apparent immunity to counter-sniper efforts. Multiple attempts have been made to locate and eliminate this threat, including the deployment of specialized sniper teams and drone surveillance. All had failed, leading to growing frustration among military commanders and an almost mythical status for the Ghost among ordinary soldiers. Sarah's journalistic instincts told her that this story could be significant beyond the immediate military implications. The psychological impact of a single skilled individual on an entire battlefield represented something powerful about human capability and determination. She had seen how the Ghost's presence affected morale on both sides, inspiring hope in some while creating fear and uncertainty in others. Her camera equipment had been performing flawlessly throughout the assignment, allowing her to capture the stark realities of war with the clarity and immediacy that had made her reputation. The newest digital camera body, paired with a telephoto lens that could bring distant subjects into sharp focus, had become her primary tool for documenting the ghost's activities. This morning felt different somehow. The usual patterns of engagement seemed disrupted, with unusual movement in the buildings below and radio chatter that suggested something significant was about to happen. Sarah had positioned herself at a window that offered an unobstructed view of the crossroads while providing adequate cover from return fire. She had been photographing the pre-dawn positioning of troops when the first shot rang out. Through her viewfinder, she watched as a soldier approximately 600 meters away suddenly crumpled to the ground. The precision and timing of the shot confirmed that the ghost was active again, but this time Sarah was ready to document everything. Adjusting her camera settings for the available light, she began tracking the likely origin points for the shot. Her experience had taught her to look for subtle signs: the angle of impact, the timing relative to the victim's movement, and the acoustic signature of the rifle report. These clues could help her identify the ghost's position and possibly capture the first clear photographs of this legendary figure. As she swept her camera across potential shooting positions, Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with being close to a major story. Her finger hovered over the shutter release as she searched for any sign of movement in the distant buildings. The morning light was improving rapidly, giving her better conditions for the high-magnification photography she needed. Suddenly, her viewfinder went black. At first, Sarah thought she had accidentally covered the lens or that her subject had moved behind cover. She lowered the camera and looked at the LCD screen on the back, but it remained dark. A sick feeling began to form in her stomach as she realized what might have happened. The camera body felt wrong in her hands, heavier somehow, and unbalanced. When she turned it over to examine the back panel, her worst fears were confirmed. A spiderweb of cracks spread across the LCD screen, and she could see obvious damage to the internal mechanisms through gaps in the camera housing. Sarah's heart raced as she processed the implications of the equipment failure. Not only had she lost her primary means of documenting the ghost's activities, but she was now stranded in a war zone without reliable communication equipment. The camera had also served as her connection to the outside world, with satellite uplink capabilities that allowed her to transmit stories and coordinate with her support team. Examining the damage more closely, she discovered that the camera had been struck by what appeared to be a small piece of shrapnel. The metal fragment was still embedded in the camera body, having penetrated the weather sealing and damaged critical internal components. Sarah realized with growing alarm that this piece of debris had come very close to hitting her directly. The implications of this near miss sent a chill down her spine. If the shrapnel had struck just a few inches to the right, it could have caused serious injury or death. The fact that her camera had intercepted the debris felt like a miracle, but it also highlighted the extreme danger of her current position. As Sarah contemplated her options, she heard the distinctive crack of another precision shot echoing across the battlefield. The ghost was still active, still demonstrating the incredible marksmanship that had made them famous throughout the region. Without her camera, Sarah felt helpless to document these extraordinary events, but her journalistic training insisted that she find another way to pursue the story. Looking around the apartment, she searched for alternative tools that might help her continue her investigation. The previous occupants had left behind a pair of binoculars, their lenses still in good condition despite the building's abandonment. While these wouldn't allow her to capture photographs, they would enable her to observe the ghost's activities in much greater detail than had been possible before. Sarah positioned herself at a different window, one that offered a slightly different angle on the crossroads below. Through the binoculars, she could see individual soldiers with startling clarity, their faces visible even at considerable distances. This level of detail might allow her to observe the ghost directly if they revealed themselves during their next engagement. As she adjusted the focus on the binoculars, Sarah began to notice details about the battlefield that had escaped her attention while concentrating on photography. The positioning of soldiers, the timing of their movements, and the patterns of engagement all told a story about the ghost's tactical awareness and planning. What struck her most was how the ghost seemed to anticipate enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. Each shot was timed to catch targets at moments of maximum vulnerability, suggesting intimate knowledge of military tactics and human behavior. This level of skill indicated professional training far beyond that of a typical soldier or even most military snipers. The morning sun continued to rise, casting longer shadows across the urban battlefield and creating new opportunities for concealment and observation. Sarah realized that her broken camera might have inadvertently provided her with a different kind of opportunity. Without the pressure to capture perfect photographs, she could focus entirely on understanding the ghost's methods and motivations. Through her binoculars, she watched as another precisely placed shot eliminated a target that had been exposed for less than 3 seconds. The speed and accuracy of the engagement suggested that the ghost was operating with intelligence information that allowed them to predict enemy movements. This raised questions about whether they were working independently or as part of a larger intelligence network. Sarah's mind raced with the possibilities this story might represent. If the ghost was indeed operating with official support, their activities might be part of a larger military strategy that hadn't been reported in the international media. Alternatively, if they were acting independently, their story might represent something even more compelling about individual resistance and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The broken camera had forced Sarah to approach her investigation from an entirely different angle, one that might ultimately prove more valuable than the photographs she had originally sought. Sometimes the most important stories emerged not from what could be captured on film, but from what could only be understood through careful observation and patient investigation. Sarah spent the next 2 hours observing the battlefield through her borrowed binoculars, developing a new appreciation for the ghost's extraordinary abilities. Without the distraction of camera settings and composition, she could focus entirely on understanding the tactical situation unfolding below. What she discovered challenged everything she thought she knew about modern warfare and individual capability. The ghost shooting positions changed with each engagement, but Sarah began to recognize a pattern in their movement. They favored buildings that offered multiple exit routes and positions that provided cover from counter-sniper fire. More importantly, they seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to predict when and where enemy soldiers would expose themselves to potential fire. Through careful observation, Sarah noticed that the ghost shots weren't random eliminations, but strategically chosen targets that disrupted enemy coordination and communication. Radio operators, officers identifiable by their behavior rather than rank insignia, and soldiers carrying specialized equipment all seemed to be prioritized. This suggested a level of tactical understanding that went far beyond simple marksmanship skills. As the morning progressed, Sarah witnessed something that made her question whether she was observing the work of a single individual. In the span of 20 minutes, shots were fired from 3 different locations separated by distances that would have required superhuman speed to traverse. Either the ghost possessed abilities that defied physical limitations, or Sarah was witnessing the coordinated efforts of multiple skilled shooters. The possibility that the ghost might actually be several people working in coordination opened new dimensions to the story. It suggested organization, planning, and resources that painted a very different picture from the lone wolf narrative that had developed around the legendary sniper. Sarah realized she needed to investigate this possibility more thoroughly if she hoped to understand the truth behind the myth. Her attention was drawn to a commotion in one of the buildings she had identified as a potential shooting position. Through her binoculars, she could see soldiers moving cautiously through rooms that appeared to have been recently occupied. They were clearly searching for evidence of the ghost's presence, but their body language suggested they weren't finding what they expected. What struck Sarah as significant was how thoroughly the ghost had cleaned up after each shooting session. No spent cartridge cases, no equipment left behind, and no obvious signs of occupation beyond the strategic value of the positions themselves. This level of operational security indicated training and discipline that reinforced her growing suspicion about the ghost's professional background. As she continued her observations, Sarah noticed something else that challenged the popular narrative about the ghost. Several times throughout the morning, she observed situations where the ghost had clear shots at enemy soldiers, but chose not to take them. These targets weren't civilians or non-combatants, but military personnel who presented legitimate opportunities for elimination. The pattern of restraint suggested that the ghost operated according to rules of engagement that went beyond simple opportunity. They seemed to be selecting targets based on criteria that Sarah couldn't immediately understand, but which indicated a level of discrimination and ethical consideration that contradicted the image of a ruthless killer that had emerged in military briefings. Midday brought a temporary lull in the fighting, as both sides typically used this period for resupply and position consolidation. Sarah took advantage of the quieter conditions to move to a different observation post, hoping to gain a new perspective on the ghost's area of operations. The movement required careful timing to avoid detection by soldiers from either side who might mistake her for a combatant. From her new position in what had once been a school building, Sarah could see a broader section of the urban battlefield. The classroom still contained children's desks and educational posters, creating a haunting contrast with the military reality that now dominated the area. She set up her observation post in what had been the principal's office, using the elevated position to survey multiple city blocks simultaneously. Through the principal's office windows, Sarah discovered she could observe 3 different buildings that had been associated with ghost activity over the past week. This triangulated view provided insights into the ghost's movement patterns and tactical preferences that hadn't been apparent from her previous position. What became immediately clear was that the ghost possessed intimate knowledge of the local geography and building layouts. Their movement between positions followed routes that avoided known checkpoints and surveillance areas while maximizing concealment opportunities. This suggested either extensive reconnaissance or local knowledge that came from familiarity with the area before the conflict began. Sarah's attention was caught by movement in one of the target buildings. Through her binoculars, she could see a figure moving with purpose through what appeared to be a residential apartment. The person was wearing civilian clothes and moved with the fluid economy of motion that characterized professional soldiers, but something about their behavior seemed different from the military personnel she had been observing. As she watched, the figure began setting up what was clearly a shooting position near a window that offered an excellent view of the main crossroads. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized she might be witnessing the ghost preparation for their next engagement. For the first time since beginning her investigation, she had the opportunity to observe the legendary sniper directly. The figure's movements were methodical and professional, suggesting extensive training in sniper tactics and fieldcraft. They carefully arranged furniture to create a stable shooting platform while maintaining concealment from potential observers. Most tellingly, they spent considerable time studying the target area through what appeared to be high-quality optics before making any preparations to shoot. Sarah found herself holding her breath as she watched this careful preparation. Through her binoculars, she could see enough detail to note that the figure appeared to be smaller in stature than most of the soldiers she had been observing. This observation aligned with some of the conflicting witness accounts about the ghost's physical appearance and suggested interesting possibilities about their identity. When the figure finally moved into shooting position, Sarah was struck by the fluid professionalism of their technique. Every movement was economical and purposeful, displaying a level of training that spoke to years of experience and practice. The shooting position was established with a speed that suggested this wasn't the first time they had used this particular location. As Sarah continued her observation, she noticed something that made her question her assumptions about the ghost's identity and background. The figure's clothing and equipment appeared to be civilian in origin, but their tactical knowledge and shooting skills were clearly military grade. This combination suggested either a former military professional operating independently or someone with access to military training who had chosen to remain in civilian status. The afternoon engagement began with the ghost's characteristic precision. Through her binoculars, Sarah watched as a carefully placed shot eliminated a target at what must have been nearly 1,000 meters away. The shot placement and timing demonstrated not just marksmanship skills, but tactical awareness that allowed the ghost to predict exactly when and where the target would become vulnerable. What fascinated Sarah was how the ghost's shooting technique differed from the military snipers she had observed during other conflicts. There was an economy of movement and a calmness under pressure that suggested someone operating at a level beyond typical military training. Each shot was taken with minimal adjustment time, indicating an almost intuitive understanding of ballistics and environmental factors. After the engagement, Sarah watched as the ghost methodically cleaned up their position, removing all evidence of their presence with the same professional thoroughness she had noted before. But this time, her elevated observation post allowed her to track their movement as they left the building and began making their way toward their next position. Following the ghost's movement through her binoculars, Sarah was amazed by their ability to navigate the urban environment while remaining essentially invisible to the numerous soldiers searching for them. They moved through shadows and blind spots with an awareness of surveillance and counter-surveillance techniques that spoke to extensive training in escape and evasion tactics. Most remarkably, the ghosts seemed to anticipate the search patterns of the soldiers hunting them, timing their movements to avoid detection by margins that seemed too close to be coincidental. This suggested either extraordinary situational awareness or access to intelligence about enemy search protocols that raised questions about their connections to official military or intelligence organizations. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah began to piece together a picture of the ghost that differed significantly from the popular mythology that had grown up around their activities. Rather than a lone wolf operating purely on instinct and natural ability, she was observing someone whose skills and tactical knowledge suggested formal training and ongoing intelligence support. The implications of this realization were significant for her story and for understanding the broader conflict. If the ghost was operating with official support, their activities might represent a sanctioned military operation designed to appear as individual resistance. Alternatively, if they were truly independent, their access to intelligence and their professional capabilities suggested resources and connections that raised equally intriguing questions. Sarah's investigation was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. Through her binoculars, she could see a convoy of military vehicles moving toward the area where the ghost had been active. The timing and specific targeting of their approach suggested that someone had provided them with intelligence about the ghost's recent position. As she watched the soldiers begin their search, Sarah realized she had witnessed something potentially significant. The ghost's escape from their last shooting position had been completed with minutes to spare before the arrival of the search team. This timing suggested either extraordinary luck or advance warning about the incoming threat. The search that followed was thorough and professional, indicating that the soldiers conducting it had specific training in counter-sniper operations. They systematically checked angles, measured distances, and collected evidence with a methodical approach that spoke to their understanding of sniper tactics and capabilities. Despite their professional approach, the search team found nothing that would help them identify or track the ghost. Sarah realized she was watching a cat and mouse game between highly trained professionals, with the ghost maintaining an advantage through superior fieldcraft and tactical awareness. As evening approached, Sarah prepared to move to a new observation position for the next day's activities. Her broken camera had led her to discover aspects of the ghost story that photographs alone could never have revealed. She was beginning to understand that the real story wasn't just about exceptional marksmanship, but about someone whose skills and resources suggested connections to larger intelligence and military networks that operated beyond public knowledge. Sarah's third day of observation began before dawn, as she had learned that the ghost's activities typically commenced with the first light. She had relocated to an abandoned radio tower that offered panoramic views of the entire operational area, giving her the best possible vantage point for understanding the full scope of the ghost's activities. From this elevated position, Sarah could observe patterns that had been invisible from ground level. The ghost's operational area was much larger than previously suspected, covering nearly 8 square kilometers of urban terrain. More significantly, she could now see evidence of coordination between multiple shooting positions that suggested the ghost was indeed more than a single individual. Through her binoculars, Sarah tracked simultaneous activities in 3 different sectors of the city. The timing and coordination of these operations convinced her that she was witnessing a small team of highly skilled operatives rather than one supernatural marksman. This revelation transformed her understanding of the story she was investigating and raised new questions about the organization behind these operations. The morning's first engagement demonstrated the sophisticated nature of the ghost's operations. Sarah watched as coordinated shots from 2 different positions eliminated targets in a sequence that disrupted an entire enemy patrol's advance. The timing and placement of these shots required communication and planning that spoke to professional military coordination rather than individual initiative. What impressed Sarah most was how the team managed to maintain the illusion of being a single operative. Their movements were carefully choreographed to create the impression of impossible speed and supernatural abilities, while actually representing the coordinated efforts of multiple skilled professionals working with precise timing and communication. As she continued her observations, Sarah began to notice support personnel who had been invisible during her previous investigations. Spotters positioned in concealed locations provided intelligence and surveillance for the shooting teams, while other individuals seemed responsible for logistics and communications. The operation was far more sophisticated than anyone had suspected. The discovery of this larger network led Sarah to reconsider everything she thought she knew about the ghost's motivations and objectives. Rather than simple resistance activities, she was witnessing what appeared to be a professional intelligence operation with objectives that went beyond immediate tactical impact on the battlefield. Her attention was drawn to a series of buildings that had shown no previous signs of ghost activity. Through her binoculars, she could see individuals moving through these structures with the same professional behavior she had observed in known operational areas. This suggested that the ghost network was expanding, or that she was finally seeing the full scope of an operation that had been active much longer than anyone realized. The complexity of what she was observing raised questions about funding, training, and command structure that implied connections to major intelligence organizations. The level of coordination and resource allocation required for such an operation suggested backing from governmental or international sources with significant capabilities and long-term objectives. Sarah's investigation took an unexpected turn when she noticed movement in a building that should have been outside the ghost's normal operational parameters. Through her binoculars, she could see someone setting up surveillance equipment that appeared to be monitoring the same areas she had been observing. This raised the alarming possibility that her own activities had been detected and were being tracked. The realization that she might be under surveillance sent a chill through Sarah as she considered the implications for her safety and her story. If the ghost organization had become aware of her investigation, they might view her as a threat to their operational security. Sarah knew from experience that intelligence operations of this sophistication typically had protocols for dealing with unwanted attention. Despite the potential danger, Sarah's journalistic instincts compelled her to continue her investigation. She had uncovered evidence of what might be one of the most significant intelligence operations of the conflict, and the story's importance outweighed the personal risks involved. However, she also recognized that she needed to modify her approach to avoid detection while gathering additional evidence. Moving carefully to avoid being silhouetted against the sky, Sarah repositioned herself to observe the building where she had seen the surveillance equipment. Through her binoculars, she could see sophisticated monitoring devices that were clearly not standard military equipment. The presence of such advanced technology reinforced her growing conviction that the ghost represented a major intelligence operation. As the day progressed, Sarah witnessed activities that confirmed her suspicions about the operation's true scope and objectives. The Ghost team's targets weren't selected randomly or even primarily for immediate tactical impact. Instead, they appear to be chosen based on intelligence value, suggesting that the operation's primary objective was information gathering rather than simple battlefield effectiveness. This revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of the conflict itself. If the Ghost was primarily an intelligence operation, their activities might be providing crucial information to outside organizations about the conduct and progress of the war. The implications of such intelligence gathering could extend far beyond the immediate battlefield to international diplomatic and strategic considerations. Sarah's observation of the surveillance equipment led to another significant discovery. The technology being employed was too sophisticated for typical military or even most government intelligence services. This suggested that the Ghost operation might be connected to international intelligence organizations or private contractors with access to cutting-edge surveillance and communication technology. The afternoon brought confirmation of Sarah's theories about the Ghost's true nature when she observed what was clearly a debriefing session taking place in one of the operational buildings. Through her binoculars, she could see multiple individuals gathered around what appeared to be maps and intelligence documents, conducting the kind of detailed operational review that characterized professional intelligence work. The body language and interaction she observed spoke to a hierarchical organization with clear command structures and professional protocols. This wasn't an ad hoc resistance group or even a military special operations unit, but something that resembled a dedicated intelligence cell with specific mission parameters and reporting requirements. As Sarah watched the debriefing session, she began to understand that the Ghost's legendary status had been carefully cultivated as operational cover for intelligence activities. The mythology surrounding the supernatural sniper provided perfect concealment for a team whose real objectives required them to operate undetected while gathering information about military capabilities, tactics, and strategic planning. The discovery that the Ghost was primarily an intelligence operation rather than a combat unit explained many of the puzzling aspects of their activities. Their careful target selection, their sophisticated escape and evasion capabilities, and their apparent immunity to counterintelligence efforts all made sense when viewed through the lens of professional intelligence gathering rather than military engagement. Sarah realized that her broken camera had led her to discover not just a story about exceptional marksmanship, but evidence of one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations she had ever encountered. The implications for her reporting were enormous, but so were the potential consequences of exposing an operation of this sensitivity and importance. As evening approached, Sarah faced a dilemma that challenged her responsibilities as a journalist against the potential impact of her reporting on ongoing intelligence operations. The story she had uncovered was undoubtedly significant, but publishing it might compromise operations that could be providing crucial intelligence about the conflict to international organizations working for peace and stability. Her contemplation was interrupted by movement in the building where she had observed the surveillance equipment. Through her binoculars, she could see an individual who appeared to be looking directly toward her position. The distance was too great to see facial expressions or details, but the person's posture and the direction of their attention suggested that her presence had indeed been detected. Sarah felt a mixture of fear and excitement as she realized that the Ghost organization was aware of her investigation. This awareness created immediate personal danger, but it also confirmed the significance of what she had discovered. Intelligence operations of this sophistication didn't reveal themselves unless they considered the exposure to be either beneficial to their objectives or unavoidable due to external pressure. As darkness began to fall, Sarah carefully made her way down from the radio tower, taking extreme care to avoid creating silhouettes or other signatures that might be detected by the surveillance equipment she had observed. Her movement through the urban terrain required all the fieldcraft skills she had learned during years of conflict reporting in dangerous environments. The journey back to her base location was complicated by the knowledge that her activities might be monitored by an organization with capabilities she couldn't fully assess. Sarah found herself employing counter-surveillance techniques she had learned from security professionals, while questioning whether such measures would be effective against the level of sophistication she had observed. Back in her temporary accommodation, Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her journalistic career. She possessed evidence of what might be a major intelligence operation, but publishing this information could have consequences that extended far beyond typical war reporting. The Ghost's activities might be contributing to efforts to end the conflict or providing intelligence that protected civilian populations from military targeting. Sarah spent the night reviewing her notes and considering the ethical implications of her discovery. The public's right to know had to be balanced against the potential impact of exposing intelligence operations that might be serving humanitarian or peacekeeping objectives. She realized that her broken camera had led her to a story that challenged the fundamental principles of journalistic responsibility. The next morning brought an unexpected resolution to Sarah's dilemma. When she returned to her observation post, she found a note that had been placed where only she would find it. Written in careful handwriting, the message confirmed that her investigation had been detected and provided her with information that transformed her understanding of the Ghost's true identity and objectives. The note revealed that the Ghost was indeed an intelligence operation, but one dedicated to documenting war crimes and gathering evidence for future tribunals. Their activities were being conducted under international authorization to ensure that violations of the laws of war would be properly documented and prosecuted. The legendary sniper skills were real, but they were employed primarily to protect intelligence operatives rather than for combat objectives. The revelation that the Ghost was working to ensure accountability for war crimes provided Sarah with a framework for reporting her story that balanced transparency with operational security. She could reveal the existence of the intelligence operation while protecting the specific methods and personnel that were necessary for its continued effectiveness. Sarah's broken camera had led her to discover that the legendary Ghost was actually a team of international investigators and intelligence professionals working to ensure that the conflict's crimes would not go unpunished. The mythical sniper had provided perfect cover for one of the most important documentation efforts of the war, gathering evidence that would eventually support justice for victims and accountability for perpetrators. The story Sarah would eventually write focused on how modern conflicts require sophisticated intelligence and documentation efforts to ensure post-conflict justice and reconciliation. The Ghost's activities represented hope that even in the chaos of war, there were professionals working to ensure that truth would eventually prevail and justice would be served for those who had suffered during the conflict.